Hey everyone, Joe Trahan with you, and I am joined by Ed Werder. And listen, that day has come. We got to talk about it. The Cowboys parting ways with Mike McCarthy. The deal is done. The Cowboys are in the business for a new head coach. And Ed, let's just start with this, um, because I know Jerry Jones is interested in the way things are publicly disseminated and the way they come out. But in my mind, Mike McCarthy wanted to remain with the Cowboys. He is no longer with the Cowboys. So no matter how this came out, if they couldn't agree on a contract or whatever it is, in my mind, and listen, this might be simple for some, but Mike McCarthy was fired, and I really don't see it any other way. What's your take?
Well, Jerry will officially describe it as he just allowed his contract to expire. Mike McCarthy did, as you suggested, say after the season finale with a high degree of certainty and without any equivocation that his first priority was to remain the Cowboys head coach. I think he was aware that there would be other interest. We know they denied him the opportunity to interview with the Chicago Bears initially a week ago. I think I wrote a long time ago that New Orleans was going to be a potential landing place for him. But yeah, there's no question. I mean, they spent a week, and this is just like the Jason Garrett thing. Like they spent a week having dialogue of some sort, whether it ever evolved into a negotiation for his return. I don't think we're certain at this time. But Mike McCarthy definitely made it clear he wanted to come back. He said he had made an investment here. He acknowledged the Cowboys had made an investment in him. His relationship with, I think, Dak Prescott was a driving force behind his motivation to return. And I think his family preferred to be here ultimately. But it's not necessarily a surprise. When the season began and McCarthy, a Super Bowl winning coach, was forced into this unique dynamic of having to coach for the final year of his contract without an extension after 3 12-win seasons, we thought the standard was he's going to have to go to a championship game to make that a reality. And he went 7-10. Now, there's all kinds of reasons they went 7-10 and explanations, starting with Dak Prescott's injury. But he went 7-10. He didn't come close to achieving that. And when they got together and announced he had been hired as the 9th coach in Cowboys history, they were very specific about the standard was to win a Super Bowl. They didn't come close to that either. But we did sense, I think, that there was a strong possibility that McCarthy, despite all of those factors, was likely to return. And now we know for certain it's not going to happen.
No, it's not going to happen, and there are a few things to talk about. And first, let's handle the timing of it, right? Because Jerry Jones, again, like you mentioned, with the Jason Garrett situation, he took a full week just to talk. And with the Garrett situation, I think it was just a little different with the way, that final season played out. But this season, let's focus on it because, listen, the Cowboys have been out of contention for weeks. They have been virtually out of contention, I would say, for probably a month and a half before the season ended. So my question to you, Ed, and you've been covering this team for a long time, and I know this isn't going to change, but do you think it hurts the Cowboys as an organization when you take that extra time to have whatever these conversations and talks are that probably should have been done weeks ago?
Well, we know a few things. We know there's a requisite a formula that the NFL requires teams to follow before they can make a hire. And we just saw the New England Patriots and about 5 other teams who have openings, immediate openings, begin that process or complete the process. The Cowboys now just getting started.
Yep.
They have to bring in 2 external minority candidates to interview. They can't do anything until they accomplish that in terms of finalizing an agreement with their next head coach. We've seen Bill Belichick decide he was going to go coach the University of North Carolina. And he has a buyout of $10 million right now. He has a buyout that drops to $1 million in June. Mike Vrabel's been hired by the New England Patriots. Both of those guys would have been at the top of my list if Jerry Jones was going to make a coaching change. So those 2 people, I'm told, and I talked to people just a few minutes ago who are close to Belichick, who said there's just no way he and Jerry are ever going to get together given where they are right now. So yes, they are behind in the process. In fact, if you look at the 2 teams that are number 1 seeds, the Lions and the Chiefs, the Cowboys won't be able to talk to anybody on those staffs unless they do it before tonight until their season is over. That could be in February if they go to the Super Bowl. they're the number one seeds. They have every advantage. They should go to the Super Bowl theoretically. So the Cowboys would have to wait if they want in on Ben Johnson, who's the most coveted assistant coach in football. They potentially have to wait till February for that to happen. And I guess Jerry's comfortable with that. I mean, he made these decisions knowing that this was going to be the outcome and that these were going to be the disadvantages of taking as long as he did.
Yeah, no, and again, that's part of why I say, does it hurt the organization? And in some ways, you would think that there was a decision made either yes or no on Mike McCarthy, and if there was, and it didn't have anything to do with the contract, I just don't know why it took that extra week. But listen, that's water under the bridge. I do want to deconstruct how this came about, because you did talk about the fact that Mike McCarthy got them nowhere near a Super Bowl, and those were the marching orders, because he was a Super Bowl winning coach. When they hired him, they said that's the standard. We want to win a Super Bowl, and one playoff game in 3 postseason trips was nowhere near it. This team, we're going on 29 years since they have made it to the conference championship game. So I'm curious about the death knell in your estimation for Mike McCarthy's coaching tenure with the Cowboys. And I'll go first this time, because I tried to reinforce this over the last month and a half, because I do think there was a groundswell of support when the Cowboys did not quit on Mike McCarthy as a team. They kept playing for Mike McCarthy. And I tried to make the point that Mike McCarthy, if nothing else, takes care of his players from a physical standpoint. And I thought that with them not quitting on him, they were kind of saying, Coach, we get it. We appreciate what you do for us. We're going to keep working for you. But not quitting is such a low bar. And that couldn't be the ultimate arbiter in terms of trying to figure out who should be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. The fact that this coach didn't have a team quit on him. And the other side of that is this coach, an offensive-minded coach, with an offense early in this season that wasn't strapped with all those injuries like the defensive side of the ball was. They didn't have a new scheme like Mike Zimmer brought on the defense. It was an offense that he was running, had been running for a couple of years. He put in this Texas Coast offense, as they called it when they first came up with it. That name didn't last long, by the way. That moniker kind of fell by the wayside. We didn't hear it too much after the first few times it was said. But anyway, they struggled, and they struggled mightily. They looked disjointed. They looked out of sync. Dak Prescott didn't look like the veteran quarterback who had shown in the past that he could command an offense. The lack of a running game, and whoever made the decision to go with running back by committee really hamstrung this entire team, especially that offense. But Ed, I saw some of the worst football I've seen in the 21 years I have been here early in this season, and it was on that offense. So, I mean, I think, when I go back to the Saints loss and the Lions loss, and you just keep going down the line when they, end up losing 5 games in a row, and you turn around and you say, man, that offense just didn't show up for the party. And I think that was the death knell for Mike McCarthy. I'm curious about what you think really ended it for him in earnest.
I think this breakup began when he lost the playoff game to Green Bay last year. And I think that was probably reinforced just what a disastrous result that was.
Yeah.
As Jerry and Steven and Will McClay watched this weekend's games when the number 2 seeds were playing the number 7 seeds again. 9 out of 10 times, the number 7 seed has been eliminated. Only once in 10 games did the number 7 seed survive, and that was the Cowboys losing at home to a Packers team that was the youngest team in the entire league, with a quarterback who had no postseason experience, posting the highest rating for a passer in the history of the postseason for a quarterback playing on the road. And I think as Jerry watched that and saw Dan Quinn, who was on McCarthy's staff last year and was a part of that, didn't shut down Green Bay. They scored 48 points. They go and win in Washington with a first-year coach. Kell Moore, who McCarthy forced out as the play caller on offense because he wanted to call the plays himself and convinced Jerry if he wanted to go further in the playoffs, that's what had to happen. He's winning with he's beating that same Packer team as a play caller for the division champion Eagles. who dominated the Cowboys in 2 games this year. So I think all of that played into it. And I agree that just imagine you're Jerry Jones and you're wondering, because he said several times in the offseason when he was asked why he didn't extend McCarthy after 3 12-win seasons, he said Green Bay. Okay. Yeah. So Green Bay's on his mind even as this season starts. And then, like you said, you get blown out at home by a team that proves not to be very good in the New Orleans Saints, who fire their coach during the season. You get blown out at home by the Lions in the worst home loss Jerry Jones has ever suffered since he bought the team in 1989. And I think all of those things begin to go, I should have done this last year. And so I think all of those losses this year sort of certified how Jerry felt. And yeah, they didn't quit on Mike, and Jerry expressed that, that made a statement to him about the players. But I think when you think about it, this team had been going the wrong direction for a long time. And they've had 4 losing seasons in 20 years, and McCarthy was the head coach for 2 of them. Now he can say, hey, in those 2 seasons, my starting quarterback missed 20 out of 33 games. Guy never missed a game the whole time Jason Garrett was the head coach. But the 2 times that he suffered season-ending injuries and didn't make the majority of the starts, McCarthy took 10 losses and couldn't mitigate the damage. So I think it all had its beginnings with the Green Bay defeat, quite honestly.
No, I think you're right, because the other thing that Green Bay defeat kind of set the wheels in motion was the absolute pressure that it put on this entire coaching staff, and I think vis-a-vis the entire team, because of that loss, Mike McCarthy and the entire coaching staff had to work on those 1-year deals. And listen, I said this at training camp on numerous occasions. Jerry Jones, his bet was that I'm going to put all these people on 1-year contracts. And actually at the time, that was before Dak Prescott had signed his new deal. So I included him, kind of in this same wash. You're putting all these people on these 1-year deals, and it's the same team that under the ultimate pressure that the game gives, they have shrunk. And we saw that time and time again in the postseason after 12-5 seasons. We saw these great ceilings that they would show us in the regular season. And then when it came time to be at your best, they came nowhere near them. They got 1 win over an aging Tom Brady. That's it. That's
an
all
8-9 Tampa Bay team.
That's right.
They didn't even have a winning record. They beat no teams in the postseason that had a winning record.
No, it's true.
Under McCarthy.
Yes. And I think that was, kind of what set in motion what we saw, because again, he had most of his weapons on offense as the roster was constructed, and they shrunk and they shrunk and they shrunk time and time again. And I think, unfortunately for Mike McCarthy, who I think did a good job, that's the thing that I will be left with. I kept seeing these flashes of a team that could be really good, really good. But then when it came time to really show it and to be at your best, they just couldn't get anywhere near it. And listen, I get it. I know the competition is better. And yes, they beat up on for what a long time in McCarthy's tenure here was a very, middling NFC East.
Yeah.
But even as the Eagles got better, they started struggling against them. And I just think that's what I will unfortunately, that's what I'll remember most from Mike McCarthy. Did a good job until it really mattered, and then he didn't.
Well, and that was his reputation in Green Bay, right? I mean, he had Brett Favre and he had Aaron Rodgers, 2 guys who one's in the Hall of Fame and the other one's going to be in the Hall of Fame. And he won 1 Super Bowl.
Yep.
And he didn't win. If he wasn't at home, they didn't win. Like, I can remember covering those games and Aaron Rodgers saying, we need to get these championship games played at home. And so they had the same issues in the postseason. And you know what I remember as you were speaking, we're talking about their playoff failure. When they lost to the 49ers here, remember after that game, McCarthy said, I had a bad feeling about that game when I left the locker room. Like, I thought there was a sense of nervous energy in the locker room. And then what did he say after they lost to Green Bay last year? He said, you'd like your quarterback to get started better sooner in the game. And so it's like he kind of recognized they choked. Right. And that's his responsibility. His responsibility is to get the players prepared to execute and to win in those big pressure situations. And I think ultimately, Joe, the only thing that was going to spare McCarthy this time was if he agreed to a contract that was on Jerry's terms, that didn't require a full commitment from Jerry, and that if Jerry recognized his fault as the general manager in the roster construction. He watched that game against Green Bay. How can you, as the owner and general manager, watch that game and say, I think I'll put my coach on notice, make them all coach for their jobs, and give them less of a team? That should work. Like, how can you think that's going to succeed? But that was the only way, is if Jerry recognized he set this whole group up for failure. And obviously, ultimately, he preferred not to do that.
Listen, we're working together on the same team this year, but you and I have had some of the same sensibilities throughout the whole time that we both covered this team. And you just led me to where I was going next, right? Because I do think Jerry Jones and the front office and whoever made the decision about the running back position group, I do think that they own a large chunk of some of the faults and failings of this year, because you had to know that the offense was going to have to shoulder more of the load as this team learned a Mike Zimmer defense, which is much more complicated than what Dan Quinn was having them do. So the way that played out, taking time for Mike Zimmer's defense to really find its sea legs and get a footing, it made sense. And that just made the lack of the run game even worse. And I do want to say that's the two biggest things that I think looking forward for this team from roster construction, I think, are the defensive line and fixing that run game. And part of that is hoping that young offensive line, guys like Tyler Guyton and Cooper Beebe, can come of age quickly with the experience that they've had. And they've got to find a running back who can help. It's got to be Dak friendly. You remember when Jerry used to say Romo friendly? Well, it needs to be Dak friendly, because we know that Prescott is at his best when he's running play action. He can hit the deep overs. He can take some of those shots down the seam to the tight end. And that was just non-existent. You couldn't even think about doing it, because opposing defenses didn't honor the Cowboys' run game because they had no reason to. So I'm glad you brought that up as well. All right, Ed, before we go, I do want to talk about possibilities of coaches. Where should and where could the Cowboys go from here? Who do you think kind of gets eliminated right off the bat for this reason or that? And you tweeted it and I saw it. And so let's start there. I mean, Kell Moore has to be on that list because of his knowledge of the organization, and especially Dak Prescott. He's been successful with what he's doing with the Eagles, although lately they have ran into some issues as we've gotten deeper in the season. But let's talk about his candidacy. What do you think are his biggest pluses to try and be the next head coach of the Cowboys?
Jerry values familiarity. Kell Moore has that over every candidate there could ever be. He played here as a backup quarterback. He's been in the quarterback room with Dak Prescott. His coaching career began under Scott Linehan. Immediately after his playing career ended, he evolved into an offensive coordinator who called plays for a historically successful Cowboys offense that led the NFL in scoring. McCarthy did that too last year when he called the plays. He has a unique relationship with Dak Prescott. And to me, that's where this whole thing has to begin. Like, who is going to maximize what Dak Prescott is going to be going forward in his age 32 season, where he's not a dual threat anymore. He's not going to be, contributing much to the running game. He's injury prone now. You've got to protect him. And I agree with what you said. Get him under center. Let him do play action pass. Have a dominant run. The top 6 teams in the NFL this year in running the football all went to the playoffs.
There you go.
And Kell Moore coached. The Eagles ran the ball more than any team in football this year. Now they have a running quarterback in Jalen Hurts, who their passing game has suffered because he's been out for 3 weeks, essentially through 5 passes going into yesterday's playoff game. But they ran the ball more than any team in football, and Saquon Barkley led the NFL in rushing. And Jerry knows this guy. He's a young guy. Dak will have full confidence in him. So I think he makes a ton of sense. Now, people will say, I don't know if he has the personality to be a head coach. Guess what? I heard the same exact thing from members of the coaching staff in Tennessee when Matt LaFleur left to be the head coach of the Green Bay Packers with Aaron Rodgers in the room. And they said, hey, I don't think this guy can command the room. And they're mistaken if they think he can. Well, what did he do? He went out and been one of the most successful coaches from the start in the history of the NFL in terms of winning games right from the start. So I think we could be misjudging people in that phase of their ability to be a head coach. But yeah, I think Kell Moore is a very strong candidate. In fact, I'd put him first, unless Jerry wants to go with John Gruden, who's won a Super Bowl as a head coach, or Pete Carroll, who's won Super Bowls as head coaches. There could certainly be, he could certainly sell that to the fans.
Well, I was going to say exactly the names I was bringing up, right? Because I think the next category that we talk about are coaches that will bring with them a splash. Super Bowl champion winning coaches, and you brought them both up, John Gruden and Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll's made it obvious he wants back in the NFL.
He's interviewed in Chicago. He's interviewing with the Raiders today.
Right. So, I mean, he's open for business. I suspect John Gruden would be open for business. All he needs is a call. Do you think either are viable for this situation? We know there's John Gruden issues with the NFL in terms of lawsuits, the emails with some very damning information in them, misogyny, racism, just really bad stuff. Would Jerry get back in that and bring that baggage with a coach like that, or do you think he's eliminated because of it?
Well, Jerry's had some of the same his own character issues questioned. He's been involved in lawsuits himself. Now, I do remember long ago he said he detests being sued. And so John Gruden is, by extension, suing Jerry Jones because he's suing all of the owners. Jerry Jones would probably be willing to put that aside if he was convinced that John Gruden was the right guy. Pete Carroll is an impeccable, other than his age, which is like 73, but he doesn't act 73.
Right.
And he's all about creating competition on a daily. I covered those Seattle, Super Bowl teams very closely. Right. And he is a beloved figure there, and he created a championship atmosphere. And he'll sell Jerry on that. And he's a very personable guy. Yeah. If he meets with Jerry, he could definitely close the deal.
That's very interesting. All right, the other tier, I think, are some of the coaches without head coaching experience who are really, who have made hay. And I think you got to start with the top of the NFC when you think about a Ben Johnson and an Aaron Glenn. I think other guys like Bobby Slowick with the Texans, some of that shine has worn off because that offense has really struggled this year. But in terms of those coaches who might not have the head coaching experience, what's your take on those?
And another guy I think is Cliff Kingsbury, who's a former head coach of the Arizona Cardinals, who's now calling plays for Dan Quinn in Washington. Watching that game last night, the thing that would trouble me, first of all, a couple of things that would trouble me with Cliff, and I really like him, and I've been around him a lot, is when the Cardinals did Hard Knocks, you didn't get a sense that he was really in control of his players, seemed a little bit over his head in that regard. And when I watched the game last night, I thought they were terrible in the red zone. And they don't have a traditional running game of any kind. And we just talked about what an emphasis we would place on that.
That was needed, yeah.
And they don't have that. The team that since like week 14 has gotten the most rushing yards from a quarterback has been Washington. And we already said Dak's not mobile. He's not going to be able to do that. He can't do what Jaden Daniels is doing right now. He could early in his career, not now. So I'm not sure how great a fit he is. Ben Johnson, I think he's going to get a job somewhere if he wants one. Could have had one last year and the circumstances weren't right and he went back to Detroit. What they've done offensively is going to increase his value and interest in him. Is Jerry going to pay an unproven head coach at the top of the market? He's seldom been willing to do that. He just doesn't think it's necessary to pay a head coach an excessive amount of money by how he defines that. And so I would question whether that's the right fit, but it would be, I think most people would say, wow, you've really improved your team's chances of having playoff success if you hire Ben Johnson. I just think he's going to wind up being out of their range.
I do like the fact that Ben Johnson is committed to running the football.
Well,
and what that can create for an offense.
Look what he's done with Jared Goff. Like that's exactly the system Dak Prescott needs to be playing. Now he's surrounded by enormous amounts of talent at every position. Offensive line is great. Running backs who have 25 touchdowns apiece the last 2 years. Great receivers, great tight end. So I was kind of like Aikman in his Super Bowl years. But that's what Jared Goff does under center. The way Ben Johnson uses him is exactly the way Dak Prescott should be playing football right now.
And then Aaron Glenn as well.
Yeah, and he has a history here as well. And I don't know. I see him going with the Jets or probably New Orleans, but he could be a fit here. I just think Jerry's going to hire somebody on offense unless it's somebody like Pete Carroll.
And then lastly, and we are running out of time because I got the 30-minute Zoom.
Dion?
I got the 30 minutes. We got to talk about the big shots and the long shots. I mean, when you think about a guy like Deion Sanders, you think about, I don't think this is going to happen, but Jason Witten's name has come up. I mean, what's your take on that, Ed? I'm curious.
Here's what I'll tell you about Jason Witten. Every time Jerry Jones watches Dan Campbell, who was a tight end here, backup tight end behind Whitten, he talks about how it reminds him of Whitten. Yep. And Witten's obviously been a very successful high school coach. I have no doubt that at some point, Jason Whitten could be the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. I think the timing's off now, but we're talking about a guy who hired Barry Switzer off his couch in Norman, Oklahoma after 5 years. So I don't know. I would say that's preposterous.
Yes.
But I also know this about Jason Whitten. He's the most beloved player Jerry's ever had, even more than Romo.
Wow.
And I know that when he was negotiating McCarthy's deal, he wanted Jason Whitten on McCarthy's coaching staff, but McCarthy, being threatened by the possibility of him becoming his head coach at his expense, as he saw happen with Jason Garrett and Wade Phillips not too long before, he refused to do it. So I think Whitten could be on the next staff. I don't think he'll be the head coach. And Deion,
what about Deion?
Wow. Like, are you kidding me? Like, who's going to make Jerry more money and bring more attention to the Cowboys than Deion Sanders? But I've talked to people who say that's not happening. He said he would only leave Colorado for the NFL to coach his sons. Well, one of his sons is going to be one of the top quarterbacks in this draft. Cowboys, not in position to get him, and they're just made a huge investment in Dak Prescott, so I can't see that. If Deion holds to that, I can't see that happening. And is Jerry willing to share this stage, as enormous as it would be with Deion? Is he willing to be a secondary figure to Deion Sanders?
It would be incredible. Maybe the Cowboys need to just they need to get Shiloh Sanders playing special teams. See what
safety
happens.
they can work
See
out.
What happens,
they
right?
can get him. They can handle. Yeah, they can get him on the team.
Exactly.
The quarterback's the problem.
Ed, it's great stuff, brother. Thanks for the time. The Ed and Joe show, that was fun, man. Thanks so much for the insight, and we'll be in touch. Take care. Thanks.
Sounds great. Enjoyed the season covering with you, and appreciate this opportunity as well.